Hey, I'm Coach T. Welcome back to the Python Quick Code series. If you watched the last one, you know that I did commit a canonical sin. I added Batman to the list of Avengers, and we are going to rectify that mistake today. So, the Quick Code videos are designed for adult learners like myself who are just learning to computer program with Python, or maybe adolescents who don't have computer programming resources at school, something like that. And what I try to do is I try to keep these very focused on one topic at a time so that you can learn effectively without getting overwhelmed, because learning to program can be overwhelming. Now, full disclosure, I am not an expert. I am an advanced beginner with Python. I'm pretty comfortable writing and scripting in it. I can use tkinter, I can use Pygame. I'm pretty confident with both of those, but I do make mistakes and I screw up from time to time because most of my time is spent learning in C Sharp, where I'm learning to build some professional applications for my real position as a coach, a teacher coach. So I make mistakes, and I encourage you to not get deflated when that happens, but to get good at researching. And I don't mean get good in the disrespectful sense, but I mean literally lean into the mistakes. We learn when we hit a wall because that shows us a limit, and then we learn to climb over the wall, and that is how we learn to get better at making cool things like computer programs. So, in this video, we're going to focus on the pop method for dealing with lists in Python. Pop is kind of a fun way of popping something off a list, or in C Sharp, we'd call it removing because C Sharp does not have creative, funny names. So, okay, let's dial right into what we're going to do. We're going to work with a list, which is a collection of mixed types. It could be mixed types, and it doesn't have a specific limit like an array might. With a list, it is just a sequence of elements using the zero-based index. We can iterate through them, and we can add things to a list. We can compute with things from a list. We can remove things from a list. We can insert. There's a whole bunch of different ways that we can use it. But what I really like about using them is that it's a very efficient way of storing a lot of associated information in one tight, compact space. Instead of having tons of different variables to work with, we have one variable with an index that we can iterate through to try and find things, search things, right? So they're very cool. They're very powerful tools. It's one of several different types of arrays or collections that are available to Python scripters or programmers. So we do want to get confident with them because it can simplify the algorithms or the programs that you're writing. But sometimes we make mistakes like adding Batman to an Avengers list, and we need to pop them off that list. So, a couple things. In the last video, we talked about how append adds things to the list, right? And it always adds to the end. Well, pop doesn't work quite the same way. Instead, it will remove things from the end of the list by default, but we can specify an index to remove things from. So you do need to be comfortable with a couple different things to really learn from this video. First of all, we need to be comfortable with while and for loops, because I'm going to use a couple of them in this video to demonstrate how it works. If you're not sure how to use a while or a for loop, I gotcha. Go back and watch my first couple videos in the Python Quick Code series. I'll show you all about how they work and get you confident with them. The other thing that you need to be able to do is use declare variables. You need to be able to use lists, which I have videos on both of those. And also, you do need to understand how to do the zero-based indexing. But you know what? We're going to save a little bit of time for you here. I will review zero-based indexing with you because it does really, really matter for this particular skill. So the zero-based index is the way of counting through a collection of information in most programming languages. We call it zero-based because it starts at zero. Normally, if we're counting on our hands, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5 fingers. But that's not how computers count. Instead, they go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So although I have 5 fingers, my pinky is my fifth or my fourth element, my 4 element, right? Or my 4 index. So it can be a little bit counterintuitive to new programmers to get used to the idea that this isn't 0, this is 0, right? It's a little bit strange. You are going to have to get used to that, because when you're trying to iterate through lists, especially if you have a user-facing interface, you want that to be a little bit more intuitive for them. For the purposes of this video, though, I'm going to make that zero-based indexing really obvious, because I want you to get used to understanding how the computer is counting, because that is a friction point that will only get better through you comprehending it and then practicing with it. So, by the way, I always recommend 1% every day. So try to get 1% better at what you're doing every day. That means you got to take what we cover in this video, which is already kind of getting a little long in the tooth, and you've got to practice with it. So all of that is a very long setup to show you how the POP method works. So here we go. We've got our list. It's kind of long, right? We've got Cap, Iron Man, Hulk, Black Widow, Thor, and then these are the guys that we added in the last video: Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch, Vision I forgot to add, Deadpool, and then the mistake, Batman. But also Deadpool probably shouldn't be there. So, all right, what's going to happen in our little program is for every Avenger in the list Avengers, it's going to print an incrementer value that I have set at 0, because that is the first element in our list, first index in our list, 0. And then it will print the name of that Avenger stored in the list. Then it will increment it by 1. That way we can see the actual incrementation, the actual index of that Avenger, so that we can remove them. Then, while true, it's going to give us a chance to fire an Avenger by typecasting our input. So what that means is the input is always stored as a string. In order for POP to work, it's got to have an integer. So we need to typecast the input to integer. This could blow up in our faces if we type a word, and I will demonstrate that. But for the purposes of this program, I just wanted to be able to type Batman and get rid of, or type the index of Batman and get rid of him. So whatever. Then if that number is in the range between 0 and Avengers, so that means I can't try to remove something that's outside of the list's range, because that will also throw an error, then it will fire that Avenger. If I type a number that is outside the range of the current list of Avengers, it will say, well, that number is not in the Avengers list, right? And maybe this should be clear, is not a valid index. That's probably a better way to communicate. And then I have an unnecessary semicolon. So, okay. And then at the end, once we break after typing an invalid index, then it will print off our new list. So let's run this and see if it works as intended. All right, here's our original list with all of our indices, 0 through 9. There are 10 items, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But notice the 10th element is index number 9 because of the zero-based indexing. Now what I want to do is I want to remove Batman. So I'm going to type 9 for the index, which is stored as a string, but then typecast as an integer, and he should be gone. Now if I type 10, because it's outside of my index range, it will quit, and we can see the new Avengers list. He is gone, right? Not too complicated. We can run it again, and this time, let's see what happens if I try to type in something that's not a valid index. I cannot do a literal like this for the integer because it can't convert GHG to an integer. That doesn't work. And I also want to show you what happens if we try to manipulate the interior of a list with a method like this. So I can remove Batman. That's fine. That's well and good. But what if I try to remove Hawkeye from number 5, right? Okay, now what if I try to remove Batman? He's still there. What happened? Well, what's going on in the back end is that I did remove Hawkeye, and then the list gets shorter. So now the list would only go to 8, which is where Batman would then occupy. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When I typed 9, that was outside of the total length of the list, and so it's that out of bounds warning, right? Here it is, 9 is not a valid index, and it terminates the program. So we do need to be aware that when we start to manipulate the interior of lists in Python, it can get a little bit unpredictable, and we need to be very careful about adding or removing things from the insides of lists, especially in loops, because it can get very hard to track what's going on. So I'd recommend, if you're going to pop or append, do it from the end of a list, right? The default spot, or the -1 spot with popping. That way you always know you're pulling from the end of the list. But that's it. That's how we use the pop method. This is kind of a roundabout way of demonstrating it. We can really simplify this by saying we would take, where's my Avengers list? Avengers dot pop, and we're just going to pop off the 9th index. Oops, I don't need a semicolon. And then we'll, for Avenger in Avengers, print Avenger. Oop. This is another simpler way of doing this, right? Without all of the other fuss and muss. We would pop off the 9th index, which means we should not get Batman in our second index. So here we go. Cap, Iron Man, prints it again, and he's gone from there, right? So you can specify with a specific integer. I like using variables because it gets us away from the magic number anti-pattern, and it does get us thinking more algorithmically. So something to keep in mind. But hopefully this introduces the pop method in a comprehensible step-by-step fashion for you, and you're comfortable with the two key ideas that pop removes items from the end of a list by default, and we can also remove them at a certain point in the list by specifying the index. But be careful when you do that, because if you do it more than once, the next index may not be the one that you think it is. Okay, that's it. If you like this kind of step-by-step approach to using to learning Python, consider subscribing to the channel. Drop a comment down below if you got a question or if you've got a tip for another learner. I always appreciate that. I'm happy to have taught you about the pop method today, and we will be back next week with, we might look at the insert method, honestly, and then I think we're on to tuples. So that's it for this week. Make sure you go practice, because we don't learn a lot from just stuffing our heads with theory. We learn through practical application. So go practice. Go build something cool.